I'm diving into a moment from Indian Wells that sparked a ton of debate, but I'm going to turn it into a full, creator-length breakdown, not a transcript, but a fresh take with angles you might have missed. Let's unpack the hindrance call between Draper and Daniil Medvedev, why it mattered on the court, and what it signals about officiating, momentum, and the larger game in high-stakes matches. I'm not here to dunk on anyone. Personally, I think Medvedev was the stronger player that day and Draper pushed him, but the controversy around the hindrance call reveals more about perception, rules intent, and human judgment than about one rally. What's fascinating is how a single gesture can tilt confidence, blur borders between chance and design, and become a talking point for fans, players, and officials alike. From my perspective, this moment is less about who won the point and more about what fans expect from fairness in sport when split-second decisions hinge on micro-interactions. Let's set the scene quickly. Draper was involved in a rally that Medvedev eventually won, but Draper admitted he made a slight hand gesture during the point. The umpire deemed it a hindrance, a ruling that can change the momentum and the point's result. Draper later said he didn't feel angry with Medvedev, and he didn't believe he hindered him enough to justify the call. Medvedev's response was more cautious. He acknowledged being distracted, but he didn't claim foul play. He left it to the referee's judgment. Idea 1. The line between hindrance and distraction is razor-thin. Commentary. This is a classic example of how intent versus impact collide in sports officiating. If a player makes a small gesture, are we measuring intention or outcome? In that rally, the gesture was minor, yet the ruling labeled it a hindrance. What's striking is how quickly the perception can shift. One camera angle, one crowd reaction, one moment of doubt in a player's rhythm. Personal interpretation. I suspect refs lean on precedent and the spirit of the rule. Any action that could reasonably distract an opponent, even momentarily, qualifies. But the real-world application always leaves room for debate because human perception is imperfect and split-second forks of fate decide. This matters because it shapes players' behavior. Will stars start muting gestures or, conversely, weaponize small signals to test officials? Analysis. If we normalize such calls, players might become hyper-aware of any motion near the ball, which could slow the game's tempo or erode natural communication between players and officials. It also feeds into a bigger trend, officiating fatigue and consistency across big events. What people misunderstand, a hindrance isn't always malicious, often it's a marginal act, and the rule's purpose is fairness. The controversy arises when fans feel the threshold for hinder is inconsistent. Bigger trend connection. This ties into broader debates about officiating transparency, standardized guidelines, and how broadcasters and fans interpret gray areas in real time. Idea 2. The psychological ripple, momentum, doubt, and the crowd's energy. Commentary. After a call like this, the next point isn't just another rally, it carries a psychological charge. Medvedev admitted distraction but not full-blown cheating. Draper suggested the penalty was harsh. That dynamic matters because belief in fairness feeds confidence, and confidence feeds performance. Personal interpretation. In my view, the mind game matters almost as much as the physical play. A tense moment can shift routine, timing, and comfort with risk. When a call is contested, players second-guess their own cues, where to stand, how hard to hit, when to go for riskier shots. That ripple effect can tilt the match's arc more than the single point. Analysis. The incident exposes how players manage pressure. They either absorb the moment, trust the official, or try to override their own nerves with aggression or caution. The latter can become alien to their usual playstyle. What people don't realize, the crowd's reaction amplifies this. In Indian Wells, a chant or murmur can psych out a player just enough to alter timing on a serve or return. Bigger trend connection. This highlights the delicate balance between rule enforcement and human psychology in sports at the elite level. It's not just technique, it's mental endurance under scrutiny. Idea 3. Rules ethics. Did Medvedev gain an edge, or did he simply ride the moment? Commentary. Medvedev's stance, he didn't feel good about it, but he didn't accuse Draper of cheating, reflects a nuanced ethics stance. The line between advantage and advantage-seeking is thin. If a gesture slightly distracts but doesn't define the rally, is the point justly awarded to the stronger player, as this match suggested? Personal interpretation. I think this reflects tennis's core tension, in-the-moment decision-making versus long-term integrity. The referee's decision embodies that compromise, and Medvedev's admission hints at a personal burden, navigating a moment where you're glad to keep playing, yet aware a small action could skew perception. Analysis. This raises a deeper question. Should the sport evolve toward more explicit instruction on gestures, Or should we keep the ambiguity and let players adapt? If every near gesture is penalized, the game could become less fluid. If we tolerate it, players might test limits until the thresholds become predictable only to the top few. What people misunderstand: some fans treat the call as a simple win-or-loss hinge. In reality, it's a micro-case study in how officiating, perception, and performance interlock under pressure. Bigger trend connection: it mirrors debates in other sports about cheating by distraction. The broader trend is toward clearer guidelines and more consistent enforcement to preserve fairness without derailing natural play. Idea 4. Narrative impact: what this moment teaches about public memory of officiating decisions. Commentary: moments like this stick in fans' heads because they are emotionally charged and publicly debated. A single call can color the memory of a match long after the scoreline is forgotten. This reveals the power of officiating in shaping legacy and narrative, not just outcomes. Personal interpretation: personally, I think audiences remember the drama more than the details. The takeaway isn't only who won, but what viewers feel about the fairness and drama of the sport. That perception can influence future viewership, sponsor interest, and the sport's marketability. Analysis: the media narrative around this decision may become a lens through which people interpret Medvedev and Draper's careers over time, for better or worse. That matters because reputational momentum can influence opportunities and pressure in future matchups. What people don't realize: fans often conflate a controversial moment with a trend. One call becomes the era of hindrance in their memory, even if data shows it's an isolated incident. Bigger trend connection: this illustrates how sports storytelling evolves alongside data. As broadcasts add more angles and analytics, the way we perceive and discuss calls becomes more layered and sometimes louder than the actual ruling. Idea 5. Future implications for players and officiating culture. Commentary: if the sport leans towards stricter enforcement on gestures, players might adjust their style to minimize risk. If not, officials will keep trusting context and flow over micro-interventions. Either path shapes how the next generation approaches on-court behavior. Personal interpretation: I'm intrigued by what this implies for coaching. Will players train to suppress any non-ball movement near the court, or will they train to anticipate and ride the moment with composure? The answer matters for how a player develops their timing and rhythm in crucial points. Analysis: there's a systemic angle too. Training referees with more standardized criteria and more robust multi-angle review could reduce ambiguity. But even with tech, the human factor remains. The moment itself is inherently uncertain. What this really suggests: balance is key. Clear rules, consistent application, and an emphasis on fair play without suffocating spontaneity will keep tennis dynamic and credible. Bigger trend connection: across sports, there's a push toward transparent officiating, better referee education, and fan-facing explanations post-match. This incident is a microcosm of that ongoing evolution. Closing thought: what this moment ultimately reveals is that high-stakes sports are less about stat sheets and more about the choreography of perception, rules, and human judgment under pressure. The hindrance call is a case study in how a tiny gesture can ignite a broader conversation about fairness, psychology, and the future of officiating. If you take a step back and think about it, these debates push the sport forward, even when they're messy in the moment. So what do you think? Should tennis tighten the rules around gestures, or keep the human edge that makes matches feel organic and unpredictable? If you enjoyed this breakdown, smash the like button, subscribe for more creator-led analyses, and drop your take in the comments. Do you think Draper's gesture should have changed the point, or was the call a harsh overreach? I'll be reading and replying to your thoughts.